Welcome to Silence, where we explore the alchemy of disciplines, practices, and beliefs that get us to our best thinking, insights, and creativity. Now, on to the show. All right, Jared, welcome to Silence. Thanks for coming on today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Rob.
Well, I thought we'd start. I think it would be appropriate, and this may be the only time in somebody's day who's listening, is to actually just start with 20 seconds or so of silence. You know, I was listening just to a podcast this morning talking about our kids and just how many inputs are coming in all the time. And I know you and I both are fans of podcasts and listen to a lot. And I realized I never hardly have a break, of silence in the day. So I thought, let's just take 20 seconds, kind of recenter ourselves and for our audience, and then we'll begin the conversation.
I love it. Let's do it.
All right, we'll get back to it. I hope that was a nice little break. Well, tell us first who you are. However you want to do bio. We know each other a long time, but kind of however far back you want to go. But tell us a little bit about Jared Milbury.
Well, my name is Jared Milbury. I grew up in New York, raised about 15 miles outside the city. My family moved to Atlanta when I was 17, so I've been a Southerner now for the vast majority of my life. Currently, I work in the investment management field. And prior to that, I was an attorney for about 5 years. And I am married to my amazing wife, Amy, and I have 2 kids, 2 boys, 16 and soon to be 14.
And a dog.
Which
we were just talking about.
100-pound Rhodesian Ridgeback.
Yeah, that's great. Well, you're one of the most thoughtful, intelligent guys I know, hence wanting to share some space with you today. But, silence is really about, the conversation around thinking and creativity, authenticity. I know you and I have both been inspired by Rick Rubin's, recent book or a couple years back, The Creative Act. And, just to open up the conversation about thinking creativity in your life, where does that intersect your day in, day out? I'm curious about kind of where you draw from. But you're such a thoughtful guy, so well read. So how does thinking and creativity intersect? Where do you find, and when I say thinking, great thinking, inspirational thinking, challenging thinking, those things?
I love the theme of silence because, I don't get a ton of it unless I carve it out intentionally. You brought up our dog, Ralph. One of the great side benefits of having Ralph over the last 2 years has been these morning hikes that we've got to take him on just to deplete his energy tanks. So either Amy or I will take him to the river park down the street from our house, and we'll go on a 4 or 5 mile hike every morning. And that I have come to find has been one of the best recent additions in my day. I will generally try not to listen to podcasts or be on the phone during that time. I just want to be out there and carve out kind of an opportunity to hear things that I otherwise normally wouldn't hear.
Yeah.
Just because I'm constantly inundated with emails or calls or texts, just to be able to reflect, get some silence, get my body moving, which is also kind of a practice I've found lends itself to fostering creativity. And that's typically where I get good ideas, inspired ideas. I've come to see them. And I think about it as being inspired by something outside of me that is coming in, whether it's a thought for my wife, whether it's a thought for my teenagers, whether it's a thought for something at work, if it's a problem that I've been considering, either in relationships or with the things that I do professionally, that's often when I get something that didn't even seem like it was my own idea.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I've actually come to really respect that and look forward to it happening. And it's not something that can be forced, but those moments, there's an experience I have that I've come to trust as this is coming from outside of me and I need to respect it.
Yeah. You jump like 3 steps ahead, right to the heart of it. I love it. So how do you, that's fantastic. And, hits on several things that help me in life too, i.e. being outside and movement. So how do you know when you have one of those ideas? How do you distinguish that from, or, not ordinary in that it's bad, but just kind of run in the mill thinking that generates 90% of your day. But how do you know it's something different?
The way I've come to know it is usually it's completely counterintuitive. If I were to, let's say, be forced to quickly state how I should respond to something, whether it's a relational challenge or something with work or elsewhere in my personal life, and then I get this quote unquote inspired thought, it's almost always different from what I would have chosen and how I would have chosen on my own to handle it. And it's almost comically different, where often I find myself laughing. Like, that's
absurd.
A ridiculous idea.
Yeah.
If somebody else had told me that's what I should do, I would tell them they were an idiot for the suggestion.
Right.
And now it's also often, and this sounds a little woo-woo, but it's often accompanied by a deep breath that's almost like a plunger being pushed into me, where I feel my lungs fill up and I relax. And whenever that happens, I've come to trust it. In fact, so much so that my wife now says, "Did you get the breath?" And I'll say, "Yeah, got the breath." And she's like, "Uh-oh."
Well, yeah, what's this
This
mean?
is something we need to listen to.
Well, so that's interesting, because I was going to ask, if it sounds absurd and counterintuitive, why do you listen to it? But it sounds like it is accompanied by this somewhat physical release, peace, some manifestation in there.
Yeah, I think it hits a chord on a spiritual level that I've come to know is true. And, now coming to, I'm probably like 10 or 12 years into kind of trying to carve this out where I have these opportunities. And the practice of doing that for a while consistently, you come to see it. And I think what used to be a totally foreign thing is now something that I trust.
Yeah. Gosh, I think you're a fortunate man to have that regularly. It seems like everybody's looking for that. What do you think? I mean, I know I mentioned nature and movement. Are there any other elements that you feel like this is the fertile soil that I need to be in for that to take place?
It's usually those two things. Sometimes, though, I think on the introvert extrovert spectrum, I'm really an ambivert, like somebody who genuinely needs equal measures of both. But sometimes where I've been either more focused working at the office or more solitude, I need some conversations. And sometimes if I'm around a large group of friends and we're all laughing, sometimes inspiration comes that way also. But it's typically something where I can get my body moving and it just short circuits my kind of monkey brain. I mean, I genuinely wake up every morning hardwired for self-centeredness. Like no matter what I did the day before, no matter how consistently I've been in kind of developing some kind of, mental or spiritual practice, it doesn't matter. It's like I am starting the next day as soon as I wake up, full of fear, full of anxiety, full of, little petty resentments and all of that stuff. I've got to proactively take steps so that I'm not that guy all day.
Yeah.
Because I will wind up, hurting people's feelings. I'll have arguments with my wife. My kids are going to be responding negatively to me, the people I interact with throughout the day. And those days happen. And I've come to see it very clearly. Okay,
Yeah.
I did not start the day with a healthy morning practice that short-circuited that self-centeredness.
Yeah.
Because that genuinely is how I'm aimed every single day, unless I do something different to counteract it.
Yeah. That really resonates. I know something I wanted to hit on later, but we can talk about now was just this sense of like ego and ego self. And you said monkey brain, which is another, common term, but I'm finding the same as how do I get past my kind of hardwired reactions, which, they have a place, but often are more self-centered, are kind of smaller thinking, more me first. And I have to get past that to get into this more expansive place, where more richness is found. Have you found that those kind of moments of inspiration, are they, professional and personal? Are they more personal related? Is there a certain category, or can it be kind of across, areas of life?
I've found it's pretty broad spectrum in terms of how it manifests. I think I'm in a pretty good groove professionally, but that can also be a challenge where I do need to bring more creativity into that. And whenever I have tried to bring creativity into my professional work, there's been wonderful fruit and opportunities for that inspiration. So that has happened. I think where I spend more of my time thinking is about the personal relationships. It's about my marriage. It's about the kids. It's about my close group of friends. One of the things I've found that's kind of turned into a pretty good hack on that, just being self-centered straight out of the gates. A friend of mine challenged me about 2 years ago it's a very simple text that we send each other, but we start with a handful of things that we're grateful for, like a little gratitude list. And that sounded so dumb and so cliche when I first heard it, that I thought it was ridiculous. And probably for a month, I continued doing it every day, still thinking it was ridiculous. And today, I am not the same if I don't start the day with that. And it has allowed me to get past those little hurdles and roadblocks of my own ego right out of the gates. It's literally the first thing I do is walk into the kitchen and get a cup of coffee. And then I go and I sit down and I do this gratitude list second.
And is it you writing one out for the day?
Yeah,
is that what it looks like?
In a text message that I then share with a friend.
Okay.
And in that too, so there's the gratitude list is a piece of it. And then it's like fears and concerns is the second part of it. And then my plans for the day. So it kind of helps me organize both my mind and my spirit in a way that is directed towards something outside of me. And I think also like the fears piece of it, like I just wake up with all kinds of fears. I mean, fears about, how I need to respond to this problematic email that came in on the work front, or, something my kids are going through, or something Amy's going through, or a friend. And I have no idea how I'm going to handle it. And part of, this taps on to a bigger subject in my life of being an active member of a 12-step group where, part of it is how do I handle fear? And the way that I've come to really embrace fear is, okay, let's name it for what it is. What is the specific fear? And then what are the action steps that I need to take with respect to this fear? Most of the time, it's nothing. And 99% of the time, this is just some insane emotional thing that's never going to come to pass. Sometimes, okay, you need to have this phone call. Mm-hmm. You need to make this one phone call, and that is all you are responsible for. Outside of that, you are not responsible for the results, how this is going to be received. Any of that is none of your business. The only thing I am being asked to do with respect to this specific thing is make that phone call. That's going to take me 2 minutes. And once I do that, I have done my part. And that has really become a huge piece of my worldview in how I deal with that area of my life, fear. And I really see that as the biggest potential corrosive thread in my life. Like that genuinely is what's going to rob me of relationships and joy and peace and all the other good things that life has to offer. And that's become a big piece of my practice too.
Yeah, I agree. Fear has become like the number one nemesis. And I've had these experiences now, like as I've gotten older and older, where you break through a significant fear, maybe that's held you back. And it's just incredibly liberating. And you think, where's the next one? I want to go ahead and keep breaking through these things.
Absolutely.
Of course, each one is a dark cloud. And, in the last many years, I think it struck me in the middle of the night where I wake up. And it is such a juxtaposition. It's something about maybe loss of agency. I think the ancient Jewish people may have referred to it as the hour of the wolf. I'd have to look that up. But it's something about you. I think your unconscious is unguarded, if I'm saying that right. But, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and have these totally irrational fears and everything comes pouring in. And then in the morning, they're all a lot smaller. So that's where I get, gotten. And it disrupts sleep and whatever. But I agree on the fear front, and it may be my largest obstacle to a thriving life.
100% agree. That is definitely the biggest obstacle in my life.
How do you think that ties into to thinking and creativity? How does fear intersect those two things?
I think it's like the opposite force. Like,
yeah,
I do believe that, I'll just lay it out there. My ability to connect with God is where I get creativity.
Yeah.
It's where I get peace. It's where I get any kind of good thing in my life. And the number one thing that cuts me off from that is fear.
Yeah.
Followed closely by little judgments and petty resentments.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
if I can clearly identify those two things, sometimes it takes a while and I'm not even aware that it's happening and it's kind of background noise. But if I can get some kind of clarity on where the block is, then I know what needs to be done to remove it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it's like fear's opposite of faith, right?
Absolutely.
I realize that it cuts me off from that flow. With God and, even faith in relationships or faith that things will work out or whatever it is. And fear gets right there in the middle of it.
I always have this thought on this is how something needs to work out.
Yeah.
Like that's always in the back of my mind. I know best. I'm the director of the show here.
Yeah.
And if everybody would just do and say and act the way I would want them to, we wouldn't have any problems.
Yeah.
And that's just a huge lie.
Yeah.
And I'm only responsible for my little bit part in this thing.
Yeah.
And if I can do that well, the rest of it's really none of my business.
Yeah.
That's the director's responsibility. I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. So because I think we share this, a lot of folks we know share this, is, we like to be hard chargers. We want to go out there and live life to its fullest, right? So hopefully realize success in career and relationally, and when we're doing fun things, making sure they're really fun. And so with that comes this degree, often, at least with me, of control, well, I'm going to put in a lot of fuel and gas into this and control and a tight, so I can get this certain outcome. So there is this thread of like striving for excellent outcome, and yet somewhere in there is this fear of not realizing that, and so then it can make me uptight, and where I can bark at people or be short with people, or it's not operating out of like this deeper faith. It's I see it when it comes up with my wife, or related to our kids of, our kids have gone and done something, and if I'm not careful, some kind of fear will drive me to respond in a less than ideal way with my child or with my wife, talking about my child. Whereas when I can take a step back, kind of get past this fear and me and ego self, I can respond from a much more grounded place, which comes with love and faith and grace and gratitude. So I don't know if there's a question in there, but
I totally agree with that sentiment. Usually the way that I respond to fear in negative ways is one of two directions. I'll either bury my head in the sand or quote unquote procrastinate it, which is just another response to fear. Or I will try to control and manipulate and wrestle the outcome to what I want. And when I'm going down that manipulative road, that's when people are getting hurt.
Yeah.
And I'm hurting people's feelings. I'm not showing up as my best, kind, loving self that I want to be. And I've really had to start praying, okay, what's my part? What's the role I need to play here? If anything at all. I'll start from that framework of maybe it's nothing. And, just sit and be patient. Or, it's often just have a conversation. Just show up and be a loving dad or a kind friend without being emotionally tied to some kind of outcome. But that's where the tension always lies, because if left to me on my own devices, I've got a very clear thought on what the right outcome is. Yeah. And I've had to learn to stop being tied and attached to outcomes.
Yeah. And so often, like the kind of adage goes, it's just, it's like mist. It's like a dark cloud. There's not a lot of substance there, but it just looks more foreboding.
Very true. Very true.
And you said something about kind of true self. And I was thinking about this the other day because it shows up in so many different places. I know in both our faith practice and talking about kind of true self, false self. I was doing a great program the other day, Academy Within, and Pepper Bullock's work, and they were talking about, as it relates to emotions, from what place are you operating in a professional? I mean, it could be in any sphere, but I think we were talking about professional. And it's like there's this idea of like best self, kind of this middle, like kind of normally how you operate. And then I can't remember what they called the other side, but it was, for me, it was very much like when I'm at my best self, there's little fear. Mm. And when I'm at the other side, there's a lot. And that, my staff, I named, and I can remember a couple instances where I'm operating out of fear. They can probably feel it, whether they name it or not. And then I make some decision, and it's just a bad cascade. It's just like the ripple effect of just me operating out of fear there leads to bad thinking, bad decisions. My staff feels it. It's just, and then in hindsight, I realize it and try not to do it again. But I think, like you said, to be able to start being able to intuit, where am I today? Where am I starting today? And am I starting from a place of fear and small thinking and, taking things for granted? Or am I more, open, expansive, faith-filled?
I wish that, and maybe this will happen someday, although I kind of have little faith that it will. I wish that I could start the day not just consumed with fear.
Yeah.
But I know that I need to have some kind of prayer, start connecting as quickly as I possibly can. Otherwise, I will be that negative presence in almost everybody's life.
Yeah.
And
we don't want to be that.
No.
Yeah.
And I see the results of it on the days that I do.
Yeah.
And it's terrible. And I think we can very quickly recognize it in others, right? It's like if a person who's totally free is in the room with you,
you feel it
lets your guard down and it's contagious. And I am so quick to open up to somebody who's leading with some kind of vulnerability or whatever it is. And, my guard's up with somebody who's afraid because I have no idea why this person is acting the way they are, and it's disturbing and off-putting, and I feel his disconnection. Therefore, I'm putting my own walls up. And I agree that it's very problematic in my own life.
Well, that's a great point of, I don't know that I thought about it like this, but like vulnerability is pushing past fear. I don't know if I'd say it's the absence, because a lot of times we probably we're feeling it, but we're showing that courage to push through anyway. And how that manifestation of pushing through fear in the form of vulnerability, then, probably 100% of the time opens up a room or a conversation or an engagement to be in a better space. The other person reciprocates. It's just like more of a generative energy in the room versus when everybody's, got their guard up.
Absolutely. Like I actually try to share with people some of the real human stuff that I'm going through on any given day, really is an act of service for them so that they can be disarmed to some level and, know that I'm a guy that doesn't have it all together. As much as I used to try to cultivate this veneer of having it all together, that's exhausting. And today, I try to just, be honest with the fact that here's what I'm going through. It was a mess. My life is not all dialed in. And, even in a professional context, when sometimes people are looking to you to be the expert in a given area, I think it can be a very disarming thing that allows people to open up and you really are serving them.
Yeah. Yeah. I love when I'm on a call or something and somebody has the courage to say, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. I'm not going to make it up. But to your point, and I think earlier in life, you feel more of a pressure to have it all together, to have that veneer, to have all the answers, and vulnerability is scary. And, you're making your way in the world and, I understand it and went through it. And then the older I get, the more the vulnerability is so attractive. And
I don't think I truly knew who I was for, 10, 15, 20 years even as an adult.
Yeah.
And it's probably just within the last 10 years that I feel like I have a much better sense of who I'm wired to be. And that's been a strange process too. And, I think being comfortable with who I am today, I'm about to turn 50 in a couple of weeks. And, thank God I've gotten to this point. But at the same time, maybe there could have been things I could have done sooner to get there. Because it definitely is an exhausting process, trying to be somebody else or trying to be who an industry or a group of friends thinks you should be.
Yep.
And just laying all that down and just saying, nope, this is actually who I am, really am.
Yeah. Yeah, and it stifles our ability, I think, to produce our best.
Yep.
Thinking, creativity, just whatever's coming out. And I know you and I could both, rap on this for a long time, but think about social media. It's like it's the opposite of vulnerability. Everybody's
really
putting on the veneer, and so it's just robbing. And they have their place, at least professionally, but it's like not the good soil of vulnerability and connection. It's everybody's putting their best foot forward, manipulated foot forward, and it's just a big, 8th grade popularity contest.
Absolutely. And we're all sucked into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, for anybody, I've been thinking about it more related to my kids, but it's like, that's not going to produce the best soil from which to grow. If they're always feeling the pressure to put the best foot forward and not the ability to be vulnerable. On this topic, are there any other things that you feel like have been a consistent hindrance to inspiration, thinking, creativity? I mean, fear is a massive one, so I'm glad we hit on that. But anything else that comes to mind that's kind of a regular?
Yeah. If I could wave a magic wand and change one thing about myself, particularly how I'm kind of wired as a self-centered spirit, I would eliminate judgment. I have just always struggled with being judgmental. And, I'll look at somebody and say, you're doing it wrong. I know better. And that's really a huge bar to relationships. It creates anger because when they don't act the way I think they should be acting, then I'm upset with them. Rather than just taking the approach of, oh, that's interesting. How did you come to see it that way?
Yeah.
And engage with somebody free of judgment.
Yeah.
And when I've been able to do that, great things flow from it.
Yeah.
And sometimes I was having a conversation with a friend recently, just what it would look like, if I had no judgment and was just completely free to be proven wrong at any time. And my goal was to be casting out old ideas all the time. Oh, wow, I'm wrong.
Yeah.
What a cool thing.
Yeah.
Now I can see that I'm wrong and I can throw away that old idea.
Yep.
And I've been, married to so many of my just firm, rigid ideas for so long. But when I get to a point where I can hold it loosely and cast it off, when I realize it's not working for me or those around me, it's actually a great gift.
Yeah. Gosh, this is a great topic. Once again, I agree. And it feels like, there's so many times in life I've been judgmental. I think there's a particular trap where as we get older and we've had some success in life, it reinforces like, I know the best, my way or the highway. I know how to do this. And I think that's the typical trajectory for most folks. I mean, if your life becomes a total mess, then maybe you get humbled early. But if you keep kind of bouncing from success to success, or this upward trajectory that most of the folks we know are on, but then you come into this later stage of life and you start, my wife and I call it like calcifying.
Mm-hmm.
And then you stop growing, I think, and learning. And what you said is like the opposite of that of, I don't want to calcify. I want to keep growing and learning. I probably have an opinion on that, or maybe a judgment, but instead of letting that be a blockade, like to say, hey, I could be wrong here. Certainly shutting it down is wrong because there's something for me to learn and grow by understanding your perspective on this.
It's interesting that you said humility. That would not have been something I would have sought for myself ever, I don't think. And then by circumstances, many of which were my own making, I got humbled. And, about 11 years ago, I got sober. That was a big piece of it. And that forced me to look at life a lot differently.
Yeah.
That the way I had been doing things was not working, either for me or for any of the people that I was in a relationship with. And that was kind of the big casting off of my old ideas that were not working for me, and being willing to say, you know what? I don't know. I don't know how I should be doing life on its simplest levels.
Yeah.
And, for me now, being somebody who's pretty far removed from those immediately, intensely humbling experiences back then, it's still something I have to lean into. Like, where is this old idea with parenting serving my kids? Or, okay, the approach to life that I have might not work for this very close friend of mine or one of my sons, or what's working well for one of my sons might not work so well for the other son.
Yeah.
And being open to totally different ways of approaching things has been really challenging for me, because I think I want to be able to organize things into very simple constructs that have either served me well or I see serve other people I respect well. And sometimes that's just not where other people are at. And I could learn a lot from those other people too.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
You got a treasure in the field early. It came at a cost. I know it was painful, but
Yeah.
This gate of humility, I think about it as a gate. It's like the gateway to learning and growing. And if you're not humble, if you're closed off, if you're calcified, you stop growing. And, my wife and I have noticed this. I want to be careful here because I have so many elders that I love and respect greatly. And I don't know, I know we don't want to go into politics, but maybe it's just we're getting older, but the last 5 or so years, it feels like we've seen a lot of folks maybe a stage or two ahead of us, and they kind of have their way and they're not open to anything anymore. And, they've led successful lives. So you understand, like, hey, you've done it well. You've had a great life. And, I understand. And yet you start to feel a rigidity there. And listen, I'm probably on that course too, but I do see it. I'm like, I want to try to remain humble and open to continuing to learn, even when it seems totally foreign to me. That is not how I see this. Everything, you mentioned, like, is this how I should parent? I've been thinking about that with parenting, of like, I have this map, how I was parented, how I saw people parent. And when somebody tells me a different way, I can get so defensive about that. And yet I've actually learned painfully in the last many years that I need to learn some other methods too. Like, every child doesn't fit into the same map. I have to adapt some.
That's right.
And so that's been hard for me, because I thought, no, this is how it works. I like who I am. It worked for me.
That's right.
Yeah.
It is interesting too, all the family of origin stuff. That's a fascinating, separate topic to be gone down the rabbit hole of. But Amy and I were talking about this recently. We've been going through John Gottman's book, 8 Dates. And it's a great book. And it picks like one topic, like conflict was one of the topics. And it asks all these really thought-provoking questions about, how not only she and I resolve conflict together, but how did you observe your parents resolving conflict with the kids, but also between themselves? And how has that informed how you do conflict? Because everybody has conflict, and we have to learn how to negotiate it, hopefully in a healthy way.
Right.
That leads us to someplace better, hopefully. And as she and I were talking about it, we both had the experience where, our parents weren't really looking for emotional feedback on how a decision was resonating with me. Like
Right.
that wasn't my
Right.
experience.
Right.
And today, I genuinely try to do that. Like at the end of the day, you still have to be the parent sometimes and make the final call. But I would like at least an honest dialogue with, oh man, like you're telling me that this decision makes you feel isolated? Like that's a terrible feeling.
Yeah.
Like I know what that's like.
Yep.
In fact, when I was your age, I felt isolated in X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And I didn't like that either. And trying to teach our kids how to have some sort of emotional vocabulary and intelligence, I think is a big goal that I at least have. But the thing that's with me, I think what's allowed some plasticity to my thinking that was pretty hardened for a while on what outcomes or methodologies I should be following for success. I've got all these like young guys in their 20s in my life today who are calling me every day. And the conversations that we're having are totally different than all the conversations I'm having in a professional context or with other peers or at home with my wife. And that has really opened me up to having totally different approaches to either how somebody's going to learn or how somebody can hear something, or how somebody's going to feel disarmed in a conversation. And the older I get, the more value I place on being surrounded by people from totally diverse backgrounds. And, I just spent, as we were talking before this, 5 days at a really nice resort surrounded by people who were very similar to me. And there was a piece of me that was really missing the diverse conversations that I have on a daily basis in most of my life. And that's really challenged me to grow, I think, in ways that I otherwise normally wouldn't have chosen.
Yeah, well said. We're in Atlanta, and I was born and raised here, and I have a deep love for this city. But there's also things that are really challenging about it for me in this season of life, raising kids and space and cost. And I think as we've gotten older, we love nature and being outside, and that's harder here. Of course, you have a lot of big city problems. But to your point, the thing that we so often come back to of why we're here is diversity of thought. And, I know there's a lot of different kinds of diversity, but people who think differently than us. And listen, I know, we're in the South and there's some stereotypes there, though I think anybody who's lived in Atlanta, we're pretty metropolitan, forward-thinking city. But you find all this diversity of thought. And so I've got friends on the right and the left. I've got friends who are in faith and out of faith. I've got, friends on different sides of these issues. And not always friends, but just people I have to interact with. And Rachel and I both feel like it keeps us sharper,
Absolutely.
and just banging against us. And not that we always have to agree, but to have to think through, why do I not agree? And then often like, gosh, maybe they have a point.
Right.
So there's such a richness there where we sometimes fear if we move somewhere else, we may lose some of that. And I think it's great for the kids,
I remember encountering people who were on completely different ends of the spectrum from me for the first time. And this is, as an 18-year-old or something, and being really threatened by these different viewpoints.
Yeah.
And now, if I'm feeling threatened, that's kind of a red flag to me. Well, why am I feeling threatened? And I must not be that certain about my own ideas if I'm feeling threatened by somebody else's difference of opinion. So I actually want more input from that person. And I, crave different viewpoints now. And I'm, sometimes have to seek it out, but I'm grateful that I'm surrounded by people with a lot of different views.
Yeah. I think about a friend we both know that is a retired SEAL, and he always talks about his system. And I think about that of like, we have our life systems, like how do we do life? But he's always so great to say, yeah, I learned something new and I just added it into my system. I just improved my system. And I love that perspective of like,
the constant looking to grow.
Yeah, looking to grow. I'm gonna, like, you have a great idea there. I'm gonna adopt that into my system. Thank you.
That's right.
Yep. So what a great way to go through life rather than my system's complete and closed off.
Yeah, teach me something new.
Yeah.
I want to make it better.
Yeah. Talk about, I've been thinking about transcendent values so much as I get older. And I wonder if you share any of this as you kind of hit midlife and there is this period of a bit of disillusionment, disenchantment, a lot of the systems and institutions and people and organizations that you may have put on a pedestal or held in high regard earlier in life. You see the flat sides of them. And so I think about, so then what's really, and that's not to say they're not great organizations, great institutions, they have their place. But I then think about, okay, well, what's the deeper thing behind those that I appreciated? What should I be spending my life investing in? And I've been coming back to this idea of like transcendent values. We've hit on some of them today already. How are you thinking about those in this season of life and family and profession?
I too started life thinking this is the XYZ is the definition of success. And that could not be farther from how I view it today. If I have any, and I don't even like the word, honestly, but if somebody were to say, what would you want your legacy to be? It would honestly be, Jared was a guy who always showed up trying to be of service. And when I am praying for what I need in the morning and all throughout the day, it's, God, show me how I can be helpful. How can I show up to this coffee with a friend or Zoom meeting with a prospective client and be helpful? And first and foremost, from a selfish standpoint, that takes me outside of my own selfish thinking and my own insecurities. And it's trying as much as I'm able to be focused on the other person and how can I help? And it's really this idea of love and service. That's it. Like that is, and I don't do that well throughout the day, and I'm not as consistent as I would want to be with it. But I've tried to reflect as I did when I was driving here. Is, help me show up and try to be helpful to Rob.
Yeah.
And when I'm driving back home, it'll be show me how I can be helpful to Amy.
Yeah.
And whatever little moment I'm going into, it's, God, give me ears to hear what this person really wants to say or needs to say. And how can I be comforting? How can I be loving and kind? And I try to show up that way as much as I can, because I know that that's what brings me the most joy and the most peace, is being free from my own selfish and self-seeking motives and trying to be there for somebody else.
Yeah. Love, service. Yeah, I was going to ask about life's work, but I think that probably hits on that. And it's funny how it moves from, the external, temporal to the deeper relational as we get older.
Yeah, I don't, as we both have younger kids, not a lot is being done to instill that type of value system, at least in like a real meaningful, practical way. They're not being rewarded for it in any kind of external way.
Yeah.
They're not even really being taught how to do it on any kind of way. Like sometimes, whether it's through an experience with a sports team or something, they'll experience it, that when I'm there for these teammates of mine, that it positively affects me, and they'll see it and experience it. But I had to experience it first through pain, and then really choosing to embrace this, and then seeing the fruit of it months and years into it. But, it's not something that I don't think as a society we're talking about a lot.
Yeah. And you take it for granted until it's absent.
Yes.
And I think that's the experience with children of, most of us are doing our best to pour love and service and humility and gratitude and all these things. And if we're doing it even partially right, they're so surrounded by it that, again, they don't know what it's like without it. And then they often will get to a stage in life. I mean, I had seasons of this in my life where you have less of that and you realize, oh gosh, that's the juice of life. Like that's the best stuff. And I didn't realize. I thought it was whatever, fame, money, popularity, success. And it's like that stuff doesn't sustain you.
The absence of it is painful.
Yeah.
You feel it.
Yeah. Let me shift gears real quick. I want to ask, there was a period last year where, it's almost like the universe or God's trying to get your attention with something. But I just kept hearing this similar refrain from different leaders in industry and faith and other. But just talk about, let's see how to characterize this. Like that we used to have a bit more pioneering spirit. Like I think about, the space race, the early astronauts, and, there was a little bit of cowboy vibe to it, but these people that would go take these enormous risks, often, with space, there was a lot there that was physical, but often with thinking, and that these leaders now, this is, last year lamenting, like we don't have a lot of like cutting edge thinking. I mean, yes, we've got technology and there's some incredible stuff happening there, but it seems like people are less willing to take risk on thinking. There is this sense of like cancel culture, and if you say the wrong thing, I also wonder about social media, and does it kind of bring us all to a certain common denominator because you're seeing the same thing, you're trying to mimic other folks. And so it just kind of washes out to this like middle of the road average. Mm-hmm. Obviously the internet is an opportunity for demonstrating really out there, cutting edge thinking, but I just don't see a lot of it. So are there places in life where you feel like, yeah, I'm really trying to push the bounds in creativity or thinking here. And maybe it's just a thought experiment, or maybe it's like, no, I actually put it into practice, but I want to push out and kind of test the boundaries here.
I totally agree. I think there's been this great homogenization of thinking. It's kind of disturbing. Like if you look at it from like almost an Orwellian level, it's this idea of like groupthink that's taken place. And I'm not at all attracted to any kind of media channels that are going to be pushing that at me. Like I genuinely want to hear even people who are shockingly countercultural.
Yeah.
And I might only agree with 10% of what they say. And that's fine.
Yep.
Like I am, hopefully old enough and mature enough to distill what I like about someone's thoughts and discard the rest. And I would way rather that than the inverse of it. And so all the things that I listen to or read the things that draw me in the most are people who just think totally differently. I don't know how revolutionary my own personal thinking is, but what I'm attracted to are those that have totally new approaches to things.
Yeah.
And, whether that's the famous entrepreneurs who are living or those, from 150 years ago, I find that sort of mentality very attractive.
Yeah.
And, I'll direct one of my kids who's particularly interested in, reading about folks like that towards these guys, because I think that men and women who are just very compelling in how they were courageous enough to go against the grain. I think if someone's going against the grain today, it actually requires more courage, because I think that there's much greater social pressure, particularly coming from all angles, to direct us back into the herd. And no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, there's opportunity for it. And things, I think people are craving independent thought.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, the going against the grain. Well, I know what I was going to say is that often these folks now that we say, oh, they were brilliant, I think people thought we're crazy at the time.
That's right.
Because they were going so much against the grain. And certainly there's people who went against the grain and we haven't heard of them. And I don't know, something bad happened. But yeah, a lot of these folks, the most brilliant, seem the most crazy. And you're right. It's just this tremendous social pressure that's always existed and I think kept us in boxes. And yet it's magnified today with the internet and the connected culture. And so there's a huge penalty or at risk / penalty for coloring outside the lines. And yet we so need it. We so need it. I mean, it was interesting. I was listening to Peter Thiel on an interview the other day talking about, just a lack of innovation, that all the innovations happen on the little square box in our pocket for the most part, And then, he went through all these other industries where there just hasn't been much innovation in the last many years. And there's other reasons, I guess, for this. But it like saddens me that there's not more kind of pioneers coloring way outside the lines. And they'd probably offend me too,
Yeah. We think about it primarily in the business context. But I think just as I made the statement that we've probably never lived in a time where the pressure was so great, then I immediately thought of Galileo, who they were, almost got burned at the stake for suggesting that the planets revolve around the sun. And, obviously the pressures to go against the Catholic Church in that day and age were greater than they are today. But there was no money in it for Galileo.
No.
He was just interested.
Yeah, right.
He was interested in this idea. And, hey, I'm going to share what I found.
Yeah.
And his life was on the line for just sharing this interesting thing that he was very passionate about. We don't talk a lot about groundbreaking art or, interesting scientific studies. It's typically tied to some sort of financial incentive. But the people who are really passionate about stuff, regardless of any kind of financial incentive, are really interesting to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. A lot of thoughts coming to mind. Yeah. I remember a doctor years ago who practiced and taught an alternative method, in this case to back pain. And, he was, graduated from medical school, at a prestigious one and, had their credentials, but then along the lines came up with this more unorthodox approach, not dangerous, but just different. And he was shunned in his community, and yet he stuck with it. And that just spoke so highly to me, because it was not for financial gain. It was just because he believed deeply, like this is the right way. The right way to do it.
Yeah, I'm always going to listen to somebody who's going against cultural and financial incentives.
Yes.
I mean, I think incentives are very interesting, and we need to pay attention to what the incentives are.
Yes.
And if somebody is choosing to violate traditional incentives to broadcast an opinion, I want to know either this person's crazy, and that's a possibility.
Right.
Or
right.
they're actually onto something that I should pay attention to.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned art. I've been thinking more about art in recent years. And I mean, certainly artists have to eat, so I know there's some incentive. But as I progressed in my professional and business career, which is wonderful, and I love it, and I love my work, but you do also see some flat sides of capitalism and incentives. And it's made me appreciate artists more of, they're often doing it more from just a love and a passion, and it's almost like exploding out of them. And yes, again, they have to eat, but it seems to be, I don't know, more pure,
They have a need to do this.
To just create.
That's right.
Yeah, and there's something about that. Again, we're on a scale here, but more pure motive there. That's really fascinating to me and inspiring.
It is fascinating.
And it's like we need more art in the world for that reason.
Absolutely. Most of the things that I've been reading lately, I think I'm inspired by other creative thinkers. So I'll read random things, either in science or technology, journals that I find interesting, or particularly fiction lately. It doesn't even have to be good fiction, but at least it's someone's own creative thinking.
Right.
And their creative thinking often inspires my own creative thinking in sometimes totally different ways. Just creative thinking in my own professional life that's pretty, at times vanilla in the world that I operate in, that can bring some excitement to my own day of, looking at things differently.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, kind of coming back around to silence, as you are encouraging others in your life through these phone calls, your kids, folks listening to this, why is silence important? And we started with a bit of this, but what advice would you pass along? It's like silence is so hard to find. It is like the thing, it's like the ghost these days. It's the thing that we've killed and we sense sometimes, with intuition, and yet it might be the most elusive, at least for us in our season of life, elusive idea or concept, but I think we both agree it's important. And you were talking about some real richness that came from it. So talk a minute about that.
It's kind of like on a meta level with this conversation. It's almost comical that we live in a world where we even have to be proactive in having silence.
Right. Right. That was not the case for a lot of history.
All of human history.
Right.
But for the last, arguably 50 years. But, even as a child of the 80s, there was plenty of time just to be quietly playing in my own room, allowing my mind to freely float and think about whatever I wanted to.
Yeah.
That does not exist today. I think the purpose of it for me is to shrink myself, because my ego is the problem. It's the problem in my life. It's the problem with, the relationships I'm in. And hopefully through kind of meditating and connecting with something bigger than me, I get smaller. And my own selfishness shrinks. And I need to take steps to accomplish that, or at least take steps to carve out the space where that'll happen.
Yeah, what's that look like? I mean, you talked about your walks and that, you're hitting it there. But, I think about like silence of heart, silence of mind, certainly silence, noise, body. But are there certain things you do to quiet different parts of yourself or practices? I don't know, anything you would encourage?
I've had to find different avenues to do it over the years because it's changed a little. It used to be long runs, and then my back started getting beaten up, and
Right.
then it was long bike rides, and then I fell a couple of times. So I thought maybe it's time to look for something else.
Rowing or something.
Yeah, exactly. And then it turned into, there was an app I used that was like mindfulness focused, and that was painful early on. A 5-minute guided mindfulness meditation was painful to me, which in itself tells you something, right?
Yes. Yes.
The fact that is hurting me to be silent and imagining myself sitting on the banks of the river, watching my different thoughts and emotions float by, that simple thing was so abrasive to me. And I started doing that and growing the length of time and doing it every day and then doing it twice a day and growing the length of time. And then I started to see some real fruit from it. And I was blown away by that, which is a really strange thing. And it is like a skill. It's like teaching somebody how to work out or something.
It's a muscle.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's how I see it. It's like teaching somebody a sport, and it takes somebody else who's been down the road to show you how to do it, and then I need to put in the time.
Yeah.
And it definitely had a lot of positive benefits for me.
Yeah.
First and foremost, objectivity, because I am inherently an untrustworthy narrator of my own life. Like, I will see boogeymen that aren't there. I will experience emotions that I shouldn't be experiencing given the inputs. And when I am able to start taking an objective, almost third-person view of my own life, good things happen.
Yeah.
And that's been a huge change.
Yeah. There's almost a little magic to it. I mean,
There is.
because we're so used to being productive, to sit there in silence. And I want to loop in something, you talked about the monkey brain, which I have such a problem with. And again, probably anybody in our season of life where you got family, you got profession, you're kind of in this peak production season, kids are young, and you just have 1,000 things going through your brain. And then we've added in podcasts and shows and whatever else. And it is so hard to quiet my mind. But when I do it, I've noticed, even if in the moment nothing feels like it shifts, something deeper has shifted. And I'll then notice, like, let's say I do it in the morning. On the evening walk with my wife, she says something that may normally have triggered me, and it doesn't. Like, I have a little bit more of a pause. Like, there's something that shifted. So to get a little woo-woo, I just like something in the invisible shifts a little bit when you spend time in silence. And you may not always immediately see, but over time, there's a better ground. There's like a better soil. And I think this ties back to our conversation on fear and anxiety and these other things, is when you're never silent, you don't create the good soil. You're operating from a drier soil, and so it's easier to develop unhealthy, branches on your bush or whatever on your tree. So I resonate with that.
I have a real problem being objective, just, in my own experience. I have no problem being objective when you're sharing something about your life.
Yeah.
Like I can see that very clearly. I care about you. It's not that I don't have any emotional connection to you, but when you are sharing with me something that's challenging going on with you, it's super easy for me to see it and help you think through it. Just very difficult for me to do with my own life.
Yeah.
And a big piece of that is just all of the different, the emotional hairball that's tied into it, where we can't even get like a clear organization of what's happening. And that kind of, the practice of trying to slow down, trying to take some silence, really like trying to slowly identify, okay, what is this I'm feeling? What is this I'm thinking?
Yeah.
And for me, another practice too is this thing in that 12-step group I mentioned. We have this thing called inventory, where we'll write down all of these, think people we're angry with and fears we have and relationships that I've negatively affected. And there's kind of like a process for allowing me to really see my part in that. Where have I acted selfishly with respect to this relationship, with respect to a fear? Where am I being self-reliant? Like, am I trying to control and manipulate this outcome? Am I avoiding it when I shouldn't be? Do I need to go have a conversation and tell you, hey, Rob, the way I treated you last week was wrong. I was completely self-centered when we spoke. I know that I acted harmfully towards you. How can I make it right? Doing all of those things after I've talked to somebody else about it. So getting somebody else's view of it where they can really give me a unvarnished, Jared, this is what I see. This is where I think you're being totally selfish in this relationship. And I have to invite that. So, that can often be painful. Sometimes it's, what are you talking about? Didn't you just hear what I said? Yes, Jared. And I still think this is where you're off the path here. That I've come to see is like incredibly valuable.
Well, we spell silence differently. The name of the show, it's with a L-E-N-S. So there it is, and you just nailed it. This idea of like this silence, a quietness produce a lens, a different lens through which to see the world, to reflect on, yes, my thinking, my emotions, and can it bring clarity to life? And, I just don't know that you can be at your peak of anything without practicing some silence. And yet none of us do it very well, myself included. I mean, I always think about Mother Teresa saying like silence and solitude. I can't remember the word she used, but it's this idea of like, those are the most important things. And the older I get, the more that feels true, and like your walks, I have opportunities to get out into nature, and it just like, I think too, this is a funny thing, like living in Atlanta, there's so many people everywhere, which I enjoy a lot. But when I get out into nature or into the woods and you're by yourself and like nobody's around, there's just something that happens, and you feel this release and a peace and a calm and a quiet, and helps me be silent. But yeah.
I totally agree. Whenever I have those opportunities, I'm so grateful for it. I think initially too, it feels so weird.
Yes.
Which is problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And it takes a while to settle into that. And, once I do, I'm so grateful for it. But there is like a bar to it that I've got to willingly push through.
All right, one more question. I know we're about at time, and I want to respect the time you've given. This is going to feel a bit, like a pivot, but I know you and I talk about this a good bit, so I got to bring it in, is AI. So when we think about silence and solitude, but when we're talking about thinking and creativity, and just in light of this conversation, how is AI going to play into this? I mean, how is it going to change creativity, change thinking, wherever you want to take it? But it is like this big thing to deal with and reckon with. Potentially a wrench in the cogs. At least how we operate now, how we do thinking and do creativity. So
it 100% is. Most of it really disturbs me. There's kind of the worst case scenario pessimist part of my brain that sees this as an arms race that is very potentially problematic. But there's relatively little I can do about it in my day-to-day. And I've heard contrary arguments to this, and maybe I'm totally wrong. However, I don't think AI, no matter how good it got, would ever replace this sort of interaction.
Yeah.
Where you and I are sitting down together, connecting as two people. Even as much as AI could try to mimic that experience, at the end of the day, it doesn't have a soul in the way I define soul. And that's what I connect with.
Yeah.
That's what I look forward to when I'm spending time with people.
Yeah.
And there's always going to be something about the human spirit that's going to be attractive to me. And, I read there were AI models that were employed in kind of the mental health counseling space that were showing incredible efficacy in kind of a shocking way. I don't think that would work for me, though. And I remember during COVID, there's therapists that I've been seeing for over 10 years. And I said to him, we had to do some Zoom sessions. And I said to him, what do you think the percentage degradation of a Zoom session with one of your clients is? And he said, I think it's about like 75, 80% as effective as in person. And I said, that's exactly what I would say. That's kind of my experience too. I feel like, and that's when a real person is on the other end of the screen. So I just think that there's something lost, inherently lost through technology. And at least that therapist I know is genuinely emotionally resonating with what, and spiritually resonating with our conversation. I don't think that that's replicatable. As close as it will come, yes, it will be a really good artificial version of X. And it might be, like the studies about AI models being able to detect certain types of cancer with much greater rates of success than, radiologists. Okay, but I still want a real person to help guide me through a potentially catastrophic human experience that I'm having in terms of like a cancer diagnosis. So I don't think that it's ever going to accomplish that. But again, could be wrong.
Who knows? Yeah, let's hope not. Yeah, I was talking about this yesterday in another forum and talking about how, most things can be distributed on a bell curve. And when you are talking about thinking, creativity, it can be distributed as well. And that AI may be coming for that center, but might that push us more to the front, to these areas where at least now AI can't touch,
That's right.
Vulnerability, weakness, humanity, emotion, taste. I heard somebody say taste the other day. AI will have a hard time with taste, which is like, that's interesting, like a social construct, not taste like I'm tasting an apple,
Sure.
but having good taste. but yeah, judgment and nuance and some of these things. And so I guess my hope is that it may push us all to be better thinkers and more creative, and that we won't be able to be mediocre because we'll have a robot on our tails.
I read that article about, and I don't know if it's true, but how I believe it was Tyler Perry who shut down a big investment that he had made after he had seen a specific creative AI at work in its product. That was problematic for me to hear, because I had just assumed naively early on that within the creative realms and fields that was not going to be something that could quickly replace the human mind. But I still think the spiritual that we bring to art is not going to be replaced.
Yes. Well, same. I was with a filmmaker recently, and we just talking about how much AI is impacting their field. But yes, I think the right place to end is, and I share this, is our connection to the divine is something AI can't touch. And
agreed.
We can be vessels for, just like you started, for these counterintuitive ideas that linear thinking and processing won't get you there. Because it's like, I was thinking about this when you were talking earlier of turning the other cheek. How counterintuitive is that?
Yes.
And I had this experience once in life really profoundly where I'd been wronged and felt like I was supposed to go offer the other cheek. And it felt so strange. And yet, like you said, at this deeper level, it felt right. But you're like, this isn't logical at all.
It violates all our constructs of fairness.
A robot would never tell me to do this.
Yes.
But yet it was creating something deeper, the deeper magic within
you knew
myself.
It was true.
Yeah, I knew it was true. Leave us with this, one encouragement, just as the audience goes about, their next days and weeks. A thought, a sentence, a word. What would you leave them with today?
Carve out the time for silence and less of me.
Yes. Jared, thanks. Thanks for joining us today.
This has been a great pleasure, Rob. Thank you for having me.